The evening of July 12th, 1977 was calm as Adrian relaxed on his balcony on his home in Quebradillas, Puerto Rico. Suddenly, he noticed a small figure, a child, he thought, ducking under some barbed wire fencing that ran along nearby farmland. However, then he noticed the strange outfit that the child was wearing: the green one-piece suit, the reflective helmet, the strange shining implement that it held in its hand, and realized that it was not a child at all, but some strange being, and that this being was walking closer and closer. Well, good evening to all of my fellow tinfoil hats. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today, we are going to be discussing the fascinating case of the Quebradillas jetpack imp. This case occurred in the town of Quebradillas, Puerto Rico. Located on Puerto Rico's northern shore, bordering the Atlantic, this place is home to about 23,000 people today. It's also home to a number of beautiful beaches, a historic railroad tunnel, and the San Rafael Cemetery, which, according to local lore, has its very own resident phantom, known as La Francesa, the Frenchwoman, supposedly the ghost of a mother still grieving the loss of her long-lost child, who rises from her grave to sing lullabies. However, on the evening of July 12th, 1977, a very different sort of phantasm would visit this town. On July 12th, 1977, a 42-year-old man by the name of Adrian Adrones was resting on his balcony at around 8:30 in the evening. Adrian was a well-regarded businessman, considered hardworking and serious-minded by those who knew him. And he was just out on his balcony, kind of enjoying the evening, relaxing after a long day, when suddenly something caught his eye. Adrian's yard was bordered by this barbed wire fence that ran along some farmland beyond it. And Adrian saw a small figure come from the darkness of the farm beyond and kind of duck under the barbed wire. He thought at first that it was a small child playing around with the barbed wire fence, but as he looked closer, he started noticing these odd details of the thing's attire, which just kind of tipped him off and started making him feel very uneasy. Adrian claimed that the figure stood about 3.5 feet tall, with what he described as regular human-like proportions, except for rather short arms. He said that he could see that it had 4 fingers on each hand and duck-like feet. It was wearing a green one-piece suit, which was not form-fitting but, according to the witness, seemed to be filled with air, slightly. The green suit attached to a helmet, joined, it seemed, by kind of a dark band around the neck, and this helmet appeared to be made out of metal, but still green, just a lighter green than the rest of the outfit, and topped with a little antenna that had a light or flame on the end. On either side of the face were things sticking out. Adrian said that they looked like pointed ears, but he also couldn't make out any details on the face, because he said this appeared to be covered by like a pane of glass that stretched from the forehead down to the neck. This glass visor reflected so much light from its surroundings that he could not see any face or anything beyond it. Through the duration of this encounter, as the small being got closer to Adrian, he noticed that it was also holding on to a small item about the size of a matchbox with a pointed end that appeared to shine or be luminous. After the small figure cleared the barbed wire, it began walking in what the witness described as a normal, human-like gait towards a nearby street lamp in the front of his yard. This being was approaching the lamp and holding out the small spiked implement kind of pointed towards it, and also appeared to be staring directly up at the light. Adrian had the impression that it was seeking out energy or electricity from the street lamp. He quickly called out for his daughter, Irasima, to bring him a pencil and paper so that he could sketch what he was seeing, and also to turn on the light in the living room. Unfortunately, he said that she accidentally turned on the balcony light instead. Apparently, it was like a double switch type deal, and she just hit the wrong one, causing the balcony light instead of the living room light to flick on. This had an immediate effect on the strange little being, which turned and ran back towards the barbed wire fence and the farmland beyond. It went under the wire, just as it had done previously, then stopped with its back to the witness. It was then that Adrian noticed simultaneously two things: that the being had, one, a tail, which was long but didn't quite reach all the way to the ground, and two, a backpack. He said this backpack kind of looked like a box connected to the being's body by two straps. The being stood there facing away from Adrian and put its hands to a thick belt that it was wearing around its waist. At once, the box on its back lit up with two rotating lights of blue and red, and an opening appeared between the two of them. And this opening appeared to emit two bright beams of light. The witness described them as that extremely bright, almost welding spark-like color. And these beams were pointing down towards the ground. All of these lights were accompanied by the sound of whirring, this electric drill-like noise, and all at once, the being rose into the air. Yeah, this little duck-footed, helmeted being just took off. Adrian actually described it as taking off from the ground like Superman. However, he didn't take off and get too high. Adrian said that it was just about a height of 10 to 12 feet that this being began moving away from the house through the air and towards the nearest trees. Erasma joined Adrian out on the balcony. Soon enough, his wife and son also came out, and all they could see were these lights hovering over the ground. However, it wasn't just Adrian's family that saw these strange lights. No, a group of no less than 10 of his neighbors from his Quebradillas neighborhood gathered around listening to him describe what he had seen, while also continuing to watch the lights at a distance of about 400 feet. As they continued maneuvering through the sky, they said that the lights appeared to hop from tree to tree, sometimes dropping down to the ground and then flying back up into the trees. Not only was it this initial group of lights, which Adrian claimed was the initial creature that he saw, but suddenly another group of lights appeared next to the first and appeared to be doing the same thing, just kind of maneuvering around. Adrian got the impression that it was another creature like the first, which was actually here to help the first one, because he believed, for some reason, he got the impression that the first creature's apparatus wasn't working correctly. After about 10 minutes of this light show, the lights just simply vanished. However, then the neighborhood's attention was attracted by something else. All the animals in the neighborhood, primarily cattle and dogs, were going totally bonkers. The cattle were running back and forth, bellowing. The dogs were barking, all in the direction of the farm where the strange being had come from and gone back to. A ranch owner that was in the vicinity but not right in the neighborhood even reported that even his cattle were freaking out right around the time of the encounter, even causing injury to themselves as they tried to bash against the fence and escape their paddock. Police were actually called to the area, but they found nothing. Still, however, given how excited everyone was and how fearful they were of what they had experienced, they posted guards in the neighborhood until dawn. The whole thing made the news. There was a big to-do, quite a fervor about it. But for 2 days afterwards, Adrian himself was actually extremely on edge and almost sick from what he had experienced. His son, Rafael Edgardo, claimed to have found a strange footprint. Another one was found on the nearby farm. However, no clear description or photograph of these prints remains, unfortunately. An elderly woman did come forward to report her own sighting. She said that 2 days before Adrian's experience, on the 10th of July, 1977, she had seen a strange luminous object in the sky which dropped down into that very same area of farmland. So this is a very nifty case. But the thing that really drew my attention to it when I first came across it is that we have this pattern, which we've seen before. The Elmwood UFO encounter is a great example of it, where you have a primary witness seeing the most intricate part of a certain occurrence. In this case, it's the humanoid. Adrian is able to describe it in incredible detail. And then you have a slew of other witnesses at the same time who witness simply the lights. I have said it so many times before, and here I am saying it again. I am following a theory set down by many other researchers, such as John Keel, that light seems to be the core of unexplained phenomena. Keel postulated that light may in fact be the only integrally real part of the experience, with the more intricate angles, the craft or the humanoid, some sort of transient mask, and possibly this image is conjured or even solely experienced in the mind of the observer. That's not to say that the phenomena they're seeing isn't real, it's just that what they think they're seeing is the mask for whatever the phenomenon really is. Paul Devereaux postulated the concept, too, of proto-entities, malleable energy forms that often seem to be comprised of the same light of their attendant craft. Here, it's really interesting to note that not only was the small being holding a lighted object, but also its face was obscured by reflection, and it had the light or flame on the tip of its antenna. This obscuring of the face, too, is very neatly in line with countless other faceless entities, part of a longer tradition of the face of many, deities, entities, banshees, ghosts, whatever, being covered or obscured. Here, the iconography of the entity is at this really kind of elegant crossroads between old and new. You have the pointed ears, the tail, even the duck-like feet. These are all really in line with older images of imps or even demons, whereas it's clothed in this helmeted one-piece spacesuit, even with pretty much a jetpack on its back. This case also brings up something very intriguing to me, and that is that so much of the entity's behavior, what the witness believed that it was, seemed to be impressed on the witness. He believed that it was trying to absorb energy from the light. He believed that its apparatus was faulty. This calls to mind countless other cases where the witnesses believe, or in my opinion, it seems as though the entity or situation impresses them with the belief that the entity is powerless, that the entity is sad, or that the entity is in need of help or assistance of some sort. I know I've discussed this before here on the channel, whether it's with Mothman, the Man-Wolf, the Yowie. So many people come away from this encounter with the unknown believing that somehow the strange being that they observed was in need of their assistance. Of course, the request for assistance or hospitality is a folkloric tradition as old as humanity. The impression that the witness had of another entity is also a really odd note in this one. We just covered the case of the disembodied hands of the Loire, where in that case a woman was seemingly abducted, or at least attempted to be abducted, by a pair of metallic disembodied hands. She claimed that the voice which accompanied these hands was calling out to, presumably, one of its cohorts. In this case, the other pair of lights was believed by Adrian to be another being, helping with the faulty equipment of the first. This belief or impression of another entity, in addition to the one actually cited, really, it comes up quite a bit. I know notably the Sandown Clown case or the Honeycut encounter, both of which actually have aspects which fall in line with this encounter. In the Honeycut Gnome encounter, the beings were holding like these lighted wands or chains. The Sandown Clown case had that similar high-pitched whirring noise. But again, this is just one of those threads that seems to pop up time and time again in these encounters, where people believe that they're seeing one entity or they're seeing one group of entities, but there is another intelligence, there's another entity or another bunch of entities which they can't see. And I think it really ups the eeriness level to these cases to think again that they can see something already weird, already probably a little spooky, but then there's this impression that there's more that you can't see. And again, this calls to mind older traditions of spirits of the other world existing in these vast unseen numbers. Interestingly enough, small flying beings were observed in Puerto Rico in the infamous Mocha vampire flap, which reached its height 2 years previous to this case in 1975. It's just that in this case, the flying entity did not have the wings or capes described in many of those cases. Instead, this guy appeared to have a jetpack. Now, to clarify, I don't really believe that the entity physically was actually wearing a jetpack, any more than if it had wings, I'd believe them to be actual wings capable of flight. Just that the appearance, the image in this case, correlated to a more modern technological view of the creature. Where this translation occurs, whether in the image itself or the mind of the witness, is, in my opinion, one of the great mysteries of paranormal phenomena. To go back to the prevalence of light anomalies in this case, we also have the luminous object spotted 2 days before Adrian's encounter. So many encounters with strange beings, whether in this case a small, helmeted, jet-packed figure, or as in many others, a giant Bigfoot-like creature, begin with a simple sighting of a luminous object. And as with so many of these cases, light punctuated every single kind of escalation of this encounter. The luminous object is seen first. 2 days later, we have this bizarre small being with a reflective face and shining object approaching a street lamp. This being is then scared away by a mundane light, the balcony light coming on, and as it runs off, it seemingly turns on this apparatus it has, which then lights up, and the being takes off into the sky. The lights of the apparent original entity are then joined by another set of lights, exactly the same, and begin maneuvering through the trees before eventually vanishing. This case is just so intriguing for the simple fact that, yet again, we have this really close encounter had by the reporting witness of this extremely detailed humanoid being, which is then backed up, not, exactly what he saw, but that something was going on. The rest of his family, plus no less than 10 neighbors, all reported seeing the same strange lights maneuvering in the sky. Not to mention the attendant phenomena of all of the animals being seemingly panicked and afraid of the spot that the creature came from and to which it retreated. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the Quebradillas Jetpack Imp, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with me on my free blog at patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat. You can also check for the works cited for this and all of my other episodes. And be sure to check out Somewhere in the Skies, not just for the very best in anomalous listening, but that is also the home of episodes of Just Another Tinfoil Hat. For today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.